I had always enjoyed the quiet solitude that came with being the last person to leave work. My office was in a tall, glass building in the heart of the city, with an expansive view of the skyline that I liked to enjoy as the sun set. But there was something unnerving about staying late, especially on a Friday. Everyone else would leave to start their weekend, and the building would gradually grow emptier, quieter. The soft hum of fluorescent lights would be the only sound as I worked into the night, finishing up tasks before heading home. On one particular evening, I was alone in the office, sitting at my desk and finishing a report. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, and the city outside seemed to be fading into darkness. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the silence. It wasn't just the absence of voices or footsteps that made it strange, it was deeper, as if the building itself was holding its breath. I was about to get up to grab a cup of coffee when I heard something, faint at first, like a distant sound, but growing louder. It sounded like footsteps echoing in the hall outside my office. At first I thought it was another colleague who had stayed late, but when I looked around, I saw no one. My office was at the far end of the building, and the elevators were on the opposite side. If someone had been walking toward me, I would have seen them by now. I brushed it off as my imagination and returned to my work, but the sound didn't stop. It grew louder and more distinct, coming closer. My heart started racing. I stood up and walked to the door, peering out into the hallway. The lights were dimmed, and there was no one in sight. Just an empty, eerie corridor stretching on for what felt like miles. A cold chill swept over me as I turned back to my desk, closing the door behind me. I thought maybe I was just hearing things, maybe the building was settling, but that eerie feeling lingered, and I couldn't shake it. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as though something unseen was watching me. I tried to ignore the growing unease and focused on my report, but the feeling of being watched never left. The footsteps kept coming, louder this time, as if someone was walking around outside my office, pacing back and forth. My hand trembled as I reached for my phone to call the security guard, but before I could dial, the footsteps stopped. Everything was still again. I sat there in the silence, too afraid to move. It felt like the calm before a storm, like the quiet of a predator waiting to strike. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, and decided to leave the office. There was no reason to stay any longer, and the place felt too strange to remain in. I grabbed my bag and made my way to the elevator. The building was dark now, and as the elevator doors closed behind me, I was sure I could hear something, whispers, almost like a voice, coming from the shadows of the hallway. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. The elevator began its descent. Then the lights flickered. The elevator shuddered to a halt. For a split second, everything was plunged into darkness, and my heart raced as panic crept up my spine. I pressed the emergency button repeatedly, but there was no response. It felt as though time had stopped altogether, the world outside the elevator suspended in a thick, suffocating silence. Suddenly the lights flickered back on, and the elevator jolted to life again, continuing its descent as though nothing had happened. I breathed a sigh of relief, but the unease still gnawed at me. I needed to get out of this building. Fast. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, I rushed out and headed for the lobby. But as I stepped into the empty space, I froze. The lobby was completely dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the exit signs. I had always left through the front doors, but tonight the entrance was strangely barricaded. The doors wouldn't open, as if they were locked from the inside. Panic surged through me as I backed away, looking around for another way out. I noticed that all the lights on the security desk were out, and the usual security guard was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the entire building had been abandoned, but I had just seen him earlier. He should have been there. I turned to check the stairwell, but it too was dark and foreboding. I heard something moving, a rustling sound from the corner of the lobby. It was too quiet, too still. I wasn't alone anymore. My pulse raced as I turned toward the back hallway, hoping to find a way out through the emergency exits, but something was blocking the door. It was locked. Everything was locked. I tried not to let my breath catch in my throat as the fear took hold. The noises, those footsteps, returned again, this time from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. My head was swimming with panic. I felt like I was being hunted, like someone or something was stalking me through the empty corridors of the building. I bolted for the nearest door, yanking on the handle, but it didn't budge. The lights above me flickered again, casting strange, elongated shadows against the walls. I could hear movement now, footsteps in the dark, getting closer. My body screamed at me to run, to get out, but the panic kept me frozen, paralyzed by fear. Then I heard a voice, a low, guttural whisper coming from the shadows. It was too quiet to make out the words, but I could feel its presence, cold and malicious, creeping closer. The voice was inside my head now, echoing around the walls, bouncing off the concrete, filling every corner with an overwhelming sense of dread. I couldn't take it anymore. In a burst of adrenaline, I yanked the door open and ran out into the night. The cold air hit me like a shock, but I didn't stop. I ran through the parking garage and out into the street, not daring to look back. I never went back to that building. The next day, I received a call from the building management, asking if I had any issues with the building security system. They had found nothing unusual, no evidence of anything being wrong. But I knew what I'd experienced, what I'd felt. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. I had been trapped, alone in the dark with something or someone that didn't belong in the building. The fear still lingers, even as I walk past the office tower every day on my way to work. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I wonder what I would have seen if I had stayed just a little longer, or if I had dared to open that door again. But the truth is, I don't want to know. Because some things are better left unexplored, left locked away in the dark corners of places that should have been empty. It was a typical Tuesday evening when I found myself in an empty office building, the kind of place that feels cold and sterile after the workday ends. I had stayed late at work, finishing a report that I had been procrastinating on for days. It was a bit of a personal challenge. I had promised myself that I would push through and get it done. Everyone had left the office hours ago, and the building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustling of paper from the printer. I was in the midst of typing up my final paragraph when I heard it, a faint sound coming from the hallway. I couldn't place it at first, but it was there, just enough to catch my attention. It was soft, like the sound of footsteps, but it wasn't consistent, almost as if someone was walking slowly and hesitantly. I looked around my cubicle, half expecting someone to pop around the corner, but there was no one. The office was dark, the only light coming from the desk lamps and the faint glow of the computer screen. The sound came again, closer this time. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I knew I was the last one left in the building. Everyone else had long since left, and I had made sure of it. Still, the sound continued, as if it were coming from the hallway just outside my cubicle. The thought that it might be another late worker crossed my mind, but I dismissed it quickly. The building had a security system that locked the doors at a certain time, and I was certain no one else had stayed behind. I decided to investigate. Leaving my desk, I grabbed my phone and walked cautiously toward the hallway. The overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. The hallway was eerily quiet, and for a brief moment I felt like I was being watched. It was a strange feeling, but it wasn't entirely unfamiliar. As I walked down the hallway, the sound continued, but it wasn't just footsteps now. It sounded like a faint scraping noise, as though someone was dragging something across the floor. I froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should I keep walking, or should I turn back? My curiosity got the better of me, and I continued to move forward, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet beneath me. The closer I got to the end of the hallway, the clearer the sound became. It was definitely coming from the last office on the left, the one that had been empty for months. It had been used as a storage room for old files and forgotten furniture, and no one had worked in there for a long time. I hesitated before reaching for the door handle. The sound seemed to grow louder now, a scraping, dragging noise that seemed to pulse in the otherwise silent building. I slowly turned the handle and pushed the door open. At first, the room appeared as it always had, dimly lit and filled with forgotten office supplies. The desk was stacked high with old files, and there were a few dusty chairs scattered about. But there was something off. The air felt thick, almost heavy, as if it didn't belong to the mundane world of office furniture and paperwork. I stepped inside cautiously, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. Near the back of the room, tucked behind an old filing cabinet, was a figure. The sight sent a chill down my spine. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just the vague outline of a person hunched over. They weren't moving, but the shadows around them seemed to shift as if they were alive, dancing in a way that was unsettling. I blinked, certain I was imagining things. But when I opened my eyes again, the figure was still there, motionless. It was as if it was waiting for me, but for what, I couldn't tell. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a janitor, someone who had come in late to finish a task. But the way they were standing, too still, too unnaturally, didn't sit right with me. My heart started pounding in my chest, and my mind raced with every possible scenario. Could someone else have snuck into the building? Was it a prank, or was I simply losing my mind from exhaustion? I knew I had to leave the room, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes from the figure. It was as if the room itself was holding me hostage, its walls pressing in with an unseen force. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure was gone. It wasn't that it moved, it was more like it evaporated into the air, as though it had never been there at all. The shadows in the room seemed to settle back into place, and the oppressive feeling lifted. For a moment I just stood there, my breath shallow, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. But the scratching sound was back. It was louder now, and it was unmistakable. It was coming from the storage closet, just a few feet away from where the figure had been. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I turned and bolted out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop until I was back at my desk, my fingers fumbling with my phone as I tried to call the security guard. But when I looked down at my phone, I realized I hadn't even dialed the number. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. After what felt like hours, the security guard finally called me back. I explained what had happened, trying to sound calm and collected, but I'm sure he could tell something was off. He assured me that the building was secure and that there was no one else inside, but the way he said it didn't make me feel any better. I stayed at my desk for a little while longer, eyes darting to every shadow and corner of the office. The air still felt thick, but there was no sign of the figure, no more scraping noises. Finally, I gathered the courage to leave. The elevator ride down felt like the longest journey of my life, and when I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face, grounding me back in reality. To this day, I'm not sure what I saw in that office. Maybe it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, or maybe it was something more sinister. I don't know, but I haven't stayed late in that office building since. There's something about it now that feels off, like something's watching me, waiting for me to come back. I had always thought of myself as a level-headed person, not easily rattled by things that went bump in the night or creepy occurrences. But that changed the night I found myself locked inside a large, empty office building after hours. It was an old building, one of those massive, multi-story structures with long corridors that always seemed a little too quiet. It was the kind of place where the flickering of fluorescent lights and the distant hum of the HVAC system made it feel less like a place of work and more like a cavernous, abandoned maze. I was working late that evening, trying to finish up some reports before a big meeting the next day. The office was deserted, the kind of emptiness that made every sound, no matter how small, seem amplified. The building had been eerily quiet all evening, but I didn't mind. I preferred the solitude. It gave me time to focus. But as the clock ticked past 10 p.m., the feeling of being alone in the building started to shift from peaceful to unsettling. I glanced up at the clock and sighed. I was almost done, but I knew that at this hour, the last thing I wanted was to get stuck in the building after hours. I finished typing the final section of my report and shut down my computer. As I gathered my things, I heard a sound. A soft thud, like something heavy had fallen in the hallway. It could have been anything, I told myself. Maybe a stack of papers from someone else's desk, or perhaps something had slipped from the shelves in the storage room. But then I heard it again, louder this time, definitely not something that could be explained away. I froze, my heart starting to race. There were no other cars in the parking lot when I arrived, and I hadn't seen anyone else since the receptionist left hours ago. I slowly stood up, grabbed my bag, and cautiously made my way toward the door. The hallway outside my office was dark, with only the flickering fluorescent lights illuminating the long corridor. The sound had stopped, but my mind kept playing tricks on me. I swear I heard something just behind me. I didn't look back, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I reached the elevator, but to my horror, I found the doors wouldn't open. I tried again, pressing the button frantically, but the elevator was stuck. A quick glance at the stairs told me they were just as uninviting, especially considering the building's size. I reluctantly turned back to the hallway, the sensation of being watched growing stronger. That's when I noticed the strange hum coming from the back end of the building. I was certain it hadn't been there earlier. The hum was faint at first, like a distant echo of machinery or an air vent that had been left running. But as I stepped deeper into the hallway, the sound grew louder, closer. It was coming from the basement. Against every instinct that was screaming at me to turn around and get out, I found myself walking toward the basement stairwell. The closer I got, the louder the hum became, until it felt like it was vibrating through the walls. My feet moved of their own accord, carrying me down the long, dimly lit corridor toward the stairs. When I reached the stairwell, I hesitated. The air in the hallway had changed. It felt colder, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. The basement was always the creepiest part of the building, with its concrete walls and dim, flickering lights. I had only been down there once, and that was to fetch some files for my boss, but I hadn't heard any noise coming from down there before. I took a deep breath and stepped into the stairwell. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. I had no idea what I was looking for, but the feeling of being pulled toward the basement was overwhelming. My pulse quickened, and I found myself gripping the railing tighter as I continued down. When I finally reached the basement floor, the hum was deafening. It felt as though the sound was coming from every direction at once. The basement was pitch black, and I fumbled for the light switch, my hands shaking. When the lights flickered to life, I expected to see something, anything, out of place. But all I saw was empty shelves, old filing cabinets, and stacks of boxes. It was exactly as I had left it earlier in the day. But the sound, it was unmistakable. I turned in a circle, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but there was no obvious source. The humming noise seemed to be coming from inside the walls themselves. As I moved further into the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was lurking just out of sight. I was about to head back up the stairs when I heard something else. A faint scraping sound like something. It was coming from the far corner of the basement near an old door that I had never noticed before. Without thinking, I started walking toward the door. The closer I got, the louder the dragging sound became. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I reached for the door handle. The door opened with a creak, revealing a small room filled with old equipment and forgotten junk. But what caught my attention was the figure standing in the corner. It was hunched over, almost crouched, and completely still. I couldn't make out any details at first, but there was something wrong about the way it stood. It looked off. It was as if the figure didn't belong in the room, like it was a part of the shadows themselves. My mind screamed for me to run, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor. The figure hadn't moved, but I could feel its presence. I couldn't explain it, but something deep within me told me that whatever it wasn't human. I didn't stay long enough to find out. I turned and bolted back toward the stairs, heart racing, legs burning with panic. The hum, the scraping, the figure. I was sure it was all real, but I couldn't understand what it meant. I didn't stop running until I reached the front door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the key, but finally I was out of the building. I didn't look back as I hurried across the parking lot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure in that small basement room. I don't know what it was or why it was there, but I knew one thing for sure: I was never going back to that building again. Something was wrong, and I wasn't sticking around to find out what it was. I had always been a creature of routine. There's comfort in predictability, in knowing that the small, seemingly insignificant details of everyday life will unfold just as they always do. I'd walk to work each morning, grab my coffee at the same spot, and leave the office just in time to catch the evening bus home. Nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary until that night at the gym. I had finished up a long day at work and was eager to hit the gym. It was just before closing time, around 9:45 p.m. when I arrived. The gym, a small but well-kept place, was nearly empty. There were only a few people scattered around, plugging away at their routines, their music blaring through their headphones, completely oblivious to the world around them. I went through my usual warm-up on the treadmill, my legs stretching and my mind slowly letting go of the stress from the day. I was in a zone, counting the minutes until I could be done. When I finished, I moved to the weight section, not expecting anything unusual. As I set my dumbbells down and prepared to move to a new exercise, I noticed something odd. The overhead lights in the gym, which usually buzzed quietly and kept the space brightly lit, flickered once, then went out completely. A split second of complete darkness filled the room, and then the emergency lights kicked in, casting a dim red hue over the gym. The kind of lighting that made every shadow feel a little more ominous. For a moment I stood still, wondering if I'd imagined the flicker. I've heard of electrical issues, but this felt different. The air seemed colder than usual, and the low hum of the emergency lights was the only sound I could hear. A strange unease washed over me, but I told myself it was nothing, just an electrical glitch. I went to retrieve my water bottle from the counter, but as I turned toward the front of the gym, I saw a figure standing in the doorway. I didn't recognize them, but that wasn't unusual for a late-night gym session. There are always new faces at this hour, people who come in to get their workout in before the world goes to sleep. What unsettled me, though, was the way they were standing. They were perfectly still, facing the door, not moving an inch. I tried to shake the unease that crept into my chest. Maybe they were just waiting for the rest of their group to finish up. But as I glanced at the clock, I saw it was already 10:05 p.m. The gym was supposed to be closing soon, and the person still hadn't moved. That's when I noticed something else. The gym had grown eerily quiet. The usual clink of weights, the shuffle of shoes on the floor, even the faint music from the speakers, everything had gone silent. There was no one else around now, except for me and this person standing by the door. I hesitated, then made my way toward the locker room. As I walked past the front of the gym, I couldn't help but glance over at the figure. They hadn't moved. Their back was still to me, standing rigid as though they were waiting for something or someone. I quickened my pace, trying to ignore the discomfort growing inside me. Inside the locker room, I quickly changed, eager to leave, but something was off. The gym had never felt this way before, and I was starting to feel that strange sensation of being watched. I stood in front of the mirror for a few moments, trying to shake the feeling, but every time I looked at my reflection, I felt like there was someone behind me. Every tiny noise, every shift in the air seemed to make the tension in my body tighten. I rushed through my routine, locking my things in my bag, but as I stepped out of the locker room, I was frozen in place. The gym was still dark, the emergency lights casting their dim glow. The figure was gone. At first I felt a sense of relief, but then confusion crept in. Where had they gone? How had they left so quickly without making a sound? I hadn't heard a door open or footsteps behind me, and yet they had vanished. I walked cautiously toward the exit, glancing around the gym as I went. I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye, a flash of motion. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. The gym was still empty. My mind began racing. Maybe I was just overly tired. Maybe the dim red lighting was playing tricks on me, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. That's when I noticed the door to the office in the back of the gym, an office that was usually locked and off limits to members. The door was ajar. I hadn't noticed it before. It had been closed the entire time I'd been working out, yet now it was open, just a sliver, enough to make my heart skip a beat. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward, drawn toward the door. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and leave, but curiosity won out. I quietly pushed the door open, not knowing what I was looking for, but feeling an overwhelming need to know what was going on. The office was small, nothing extraordinary. There was a desk, a few filing cabinets, and the usual gym paperwork scattered around, but what caught my eye was the chair. It was positioned strangely facing the wall, but there was something on it. A jacket? No, it was too stiff. As I approached, I realized it was a mannequin, sitting perfectly still, dressed in gym clothes, eerily lifelike in the dim light. A shiver ran down my spine. Who would leave a mannequin in the office? And why was it positioned so perfectly? As I stepped closer, I saw something on the wall behind it, a handwritten note, scribbled hastily in black ink. Leave now. I backed away slowly, the note making my stomach turn. I had to leave, now. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the exit, my heart racing as I fumbled with the door handle. The gym felt suffocating, the air thick with tension. I pushed through the door and into the night air, finally feeling a sense of relief wash over me as I stepped outside. As I walked to my car, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. I didn't look back until I was safely in my car, locking the door behind me. The gym had always been a place of comfort, a routine that I had relied on. But that night, everything changed. I still don't know what happened in that office or who or what I saw standing by the door, but I haven't been back since. Every time I drive past the gym now, I can't help but feel a chill run down my spine, wondering if the figure is still waiting there, watching for the next person to walk into its eerie grasp. There was something.